And we're live. Welcome back to AATV Live. I'm your host, Tom Anvil Hibberd, and today we're going to talk all about OpFor in Airsoft. What it means, how to do it, what to expect, what to use, and all those sorts of really interesting questions. I can see it was already kicking off in the comments. Fantastic. So let's do the normal channel admin. We're in the middle of the crisis. The dogs are having dinner. The neighbours are probably going to have an argument. Things will drive past, so there will be some extraneous noise, but please bear with us with that. Great stuff. So, as I say, we're going to talk about OpFor today. I've managed to scrounge up a couple of fantastic guests for you. So, big welcome to Gadge and Sean. Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Hey, you're right.
So, the normal questions. How are your lockdown haircuts going?
Wow.
Disgustingly bad.
I think you should probably keep your hat on, Sean. How are you doing, Gadge?
Yeah, I'm pretty fuzzy felt at the moment.
Oh, mate,
so...
it's all growing back. Big hello to everyone in the comments. I can see we've got Ben's with us, Ben Webb, Lance, Gaz, Glenn Rickwood. How you doing, Glenn? Nice to see you there, mate. And then my other normal question is, what's in your cup?
Wow. Normally it would be beer, because I got absolutely annihilated on gin last night. It's just Diet Coke today.
And Sean, what are you on today?
I am currently on sailing ship fuel right now.
Very good. I'm having Lenton Lanes 200 Not Out, which is a local brewery, which is a very nice golden hoppy beer. Quite enjoying that. Quite refreshing on a hot day. Okay, so we're talking about OpFor. So let me kick off, but with you guys, and start with Gadge. So, what does OpFor mean to you, and what have you been doing with OpFor in Airsoft?
Right, I'm going to break it down to two things, Tom, which I think will segue into Sean as well. So, OpFor for me, from a living history kind of historical Airsoft point of view, it's traditionally the guys playing the bad guys on exercise. But in Airsoft, it tends to be the team that isn't NATO for most games. So for me, I've been Viet Cong or NVA. I've even been Apache Native Americans. I've been absolutely everything you can think of that wasn't the good guys in that scenario. And I think it's giving the other guys the opposition, really. That's literally that.
Okay. Sean, you've got a slightly different perspective, I think. So do you want to go through that?
Yeah, for me, the OpFor, there's always got to be a bad guy in a game. And again, like Gadge said, the OpFor traditionally was the military term used for opposing force. Now, I've got some experience in doing that, hence the...
Oh, Sean's fallen over.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. That's what happens when you catch a cable. Not even drinking either. Yeah, the opposing force for me was being able to do more that the normal force couldn't do. So some of the milsims, they had ROEs to play with, whereas I didn't. I could play that game. I could play that to my advantage, and I love that. I love just being a twat on the field, but in a good way with the game.
Okay, so I'll throw that out to the audience, and I'll chuck your comments up as you say. So, what does OpFor or opposing force mean to you guys as well? And I think Ben Webb's made a really interesting comment. Actually, I'll pick up on, and we can let's talk about it now. As I said, which good and bad is a bit subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for me, we have there's a very simplistic black and white view of the world where the West are the good guys and everyone else is the bad guys. But I think that's an overly simplistic way of looking at it. What do you guys feel about that?
I'll start very quickly, and I'll just throw in that, as I mentioned before, I've got a friend who lives in Hanoi, and he refers to what we call the Vietnam War as the American War.
Yep.
And clearly, to his family, the bad guys were the 1st Aircav and Navy SEALs, and they had heroic victory over, some idiots who came to try and take their country over. That's the way they see it.
Yep.
So, yeah, good and bad are subjective.
Yeah, it was the same for World War II, the Germans saw the Russians as bad guys, and we saw the Germans as bad guys and the Russians as good guys, and it is very subjective, and it depends what viewpoint you've got on it. the Taliban see they're doing no wrong.
Yeah, it's a bit like
in their eyes, and we're the enemy to them.
It's a bit like the classic
they're the enemy to us.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, isn't it?
Yeah.
In that respect.
But I think we have to reflect the fact that essentially, when Airsoft's detached from political reality, and we're playing army in the woods, and to use a horrible analogy, we're playing cowboys and Indians in a different time frame. And so if you're going to be the cowboys defending the Alamo or the Corral or whatever, there's got to be some Indians as well. So in the same way that people don't like, and we'll go back to World War II, like Sean brought up. People who wear German kit for World War II get a lot of flack on forums, but if they weren't there, there'd be no World War II scene. That OpFor is essential, but it's politically very. You have to be very careful how you do it, which I think we'll touch on later, won't we?
Yeah, we can go into that. We can do a bit of that now, if like. I mean, Gaz has made a comment here about. I don't think the likes of ISIS is so subjective as the people of the country also see them as bad as well. So but you need to be.
Yeah, ISIS. Yeah, I think we can all agree they're wankers.
So, but I think it does mean you can lead into some difficult times. So I think we just need to be a bit more. I think people need to be a bit sensitive about good guys, bad guys. Gaz also makes a point earlier about effectively blue team and red team. So, Gaz, do you want to talk a bit about that? Have you got, say, kind of blue 4, red 4 in a kind of more traditional sense?
Sorry, red.
Yeah.
I was reading the comments then. So red team, blue team in traditional sense. Yeah. So I mean, again, going back to my military history kind of leanings, one thing I was fascinated by is that when the US Army did exercises in the 1970s, 1980s, and through to the modern day, really, because they couldn't get Russian stuff to train against, their red team, actually, they made replica Russian uniforms, and they tried to use Soviet tactics, and it very was literally the red team, because it was the Red Army they were representing. But I think in Airsoft, part of what we do in the sort of things where you genuinely get an OpFor in a scenario, we're trying to move away from red team, blue team to a degree, aren't we? We're trying to look for a distinctive look that marks out that team as being from a different nation, from a different army, if that makes any sense.
It does. You had some interesting artifacts, Gaz.
Yeah, so the US Army used to wear, in the 70s, they wore like 1950s uniforms with these OpFor badges on the breast. They'd have these cap badges and their own version of Soviet motor rifles insignia or tank insignia, and they'd wear that Soviet insignia and Soviet rank side by side with the US Army rank. So you could have a guy who's maybe a gunnery sergeant or something, who's a very experienced soldier playing a Soviet major, but if he balled out a guy on the Blue Force who was a captain or whatever, he'd know that he had to watch what he said, or where the boundaries were really with it. And I found it fascinating that they went so far as to sort of replicate Soviet helmets by having plastic shells made for the M1 helmet, so it would look like a Soviet one from a distance.
Yeah.
And I think the Americans had the money to do that. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the UK we just put armbands on. I don't know what we did in the 80s, but I bet we couldn't have two mobile divisions or whatever, full of enemy.
Yeah, I think with the British, a lot of it was training for the then possible battle. So in the 80s, it was the 70s and 80s Cold War. So a lot of people were wearing slightly different camouflages. Later on, it was training for Afghanistan. So when you were up at Stanta doing training up there, all the guys were wearing basically civilian attire or dish dashes and Pakal hats, and just generally trying to look like the locals. And I think that's possibly to help with target identification when you're out and about as well.
Well, I think, definitely. It's become a lot easier now. So, I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when I was a reservist, we trained for a thing called Gen 4, which was generic Soviet-equipped force. And after the Soviet Union fell down, there was no shortage of, AKs, BMPs. So you could actually have an opposing force unit that was quite cheaply equipped with genuine equipment. So if you had your armored unit over in the States, they could actually train against real BMPs.
Yeah.
So they could spot their AFB recognition and their small arms recognition. Didn't have to go, well, they didn't have to mock it up and say it should look like this. They could actually use their OpFor was the real deal.
Yeah. Andrew Blackmore's made a really interesting point. Actually, I'll bring it up again because he quite often plays as a Russian. and he says if someone wants to get into politics, I just make it clear I'm not interested. I just like the kit. I'm there to play, not to debate. And I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think separating the politics of what you're wearing from from playing the game, I think is a really important point when you're playing OpFor. Would you guys think? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think we could kind of go ad nauseum about the politics of OpFor and everything else, but effectively what it means is just means opposing force, and it's been taken as a military, as we talked about, it's been taken as a military term from the military and applied to airsoft. We'll get into the kind of what can happen at games a bit later. What I want to talk about now is why should the viewers give it a go if they don't already? What's in it for them? What's different from their normal kit or the normal loadouts? Particularly if they're a multi-glam wearer like a lot of us are. Sean?
I think it opens up a lot more options. If you turn up to, say, one of the proper mill sims or a film sim, and they've got a specific kit requirement, like the game that you mentioned, Gage, that was going to be cancelled, that's got specific kit requirements. Whereas other games, sort of some of like the Tora Bora style stuff, as an OpFor, you can pretty much turn up in jeans and t-shirt with just a chest rig and carry ammo in a bag. And you could do other things. It opened up just so many different pathways of how to play differently. Whereas before you were sort of as like the Navy SEAL team or the blue team, whatever you wanted to call it, they're pretty much kind of forced to carry everything they've got because they're moving away from a fob. That's their regen / reorg position. When they step out of that, they've got no extra other than what they're carrying. Me, I can dump a bag full of ammo in a building somewhere and then run about like an idiot, use up my magazines, run back to a building and reorg there. I can reorg wherever I want. So I can drop a bag behind the enemy if I want. And then with an ROE game, like the Rules of Engagement games, I could just walk straight through the middle of them with a rifle slung on my back in the morning because I wasn't technically deemed a threat, so they could not engage me. And I just walk straight through the middle of them and find a better position. That's what I loved about it, was it just opened up a massive plane of tactics for you.
Gads, what do you think?
I think Sean's got it hit the nail on the head there. I think it basically opens up so much more because, I mean, I've seen the best and the worst of it. I've seen games where the people who go as the Blue Force have got a real superiority complex because of the amount of whatever kit they're using. And it's a minority, but I've seen it happen. And the guys who've gone to be the Mexican bandits or the Russian mafia or whatever they've chosen to be are actually going there for the scenario, not to show off what they've got, which is that's the worst side of it. I think the positive side of it is it does give you that much more freedom. You are able to go, I'm going to explore this role because I'm not constrained by those rules of engagement. I haven't got this mission objectives to do. My job really is to give the other team a hard time. Some OpFor do have a planned objective, etc. But if you know when we played at gunman games in the past, and again at first and only games, where there's a lot less pressure, I think, to operate all the time. You can actually just explore the role you're playing, who you are. You can switch off and be a villager for a bit. You can sort of like interact with the players in ways that you wouldn't normally be able to do in a normal skirmish.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think one of the things you both touched on was the differences between a normal skirmish and a more of a themed game. Because obviously you can pretty much wear what you want when you go to an open day, and it's very common to see Fallschirmjäger next to a US Marine, next to an SAS operator, next to a British infantryman. So I think it does give you an interesting way of exploring different loadouts, which is a bit more beyond what you see at a normal skirmish day. What do you feel about that? Is there do you think playing OpFor for yourself at a skirmish day is a viable thing as well?
Well, you do play OpFor if whichever team you fancy going on, the other team is the OpFor.
Yeah. It's very hard to differentiate as well, isn't it? Because if I go to a skirmish day in a pair of jeans and a shamag and a chest rig because I can't be bothered to wear a plate carrier or get a load of hot combat gear on, does that make me OpFor, or am I just a guy in jeans and a t-shirt?
A guy in jeans and t-shirt, really.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you actually say in this scenario, Blue 4 wear this and Red Force or OpFor wear this, really it's just civilian clothing, isn't it?
Okay, so we're talking.
Unless you, yeah.
So we're certainly talking about games with some sort of uniform rule.
Yeah.
So so in terms of common airsoft parlance, we're talking about a battle sim or a mil sim, whatever the hell mil sim means. At one point we'll cover that in a live stream. So we are talking about going to a more of an organised, more of a themed game, and being part of something a bit bigger than just yourself. I think that's quite a key point. We just have a quick look at comments for a minute, chaps. Ben is made another interesting point. In his opinion, people run through an evolution of event attendance. It's usually cheaper to start as OpFor, and we'll go into that in a minute when we talk about gear. Get some nice kit and then play Blue 4. And then after a bit of time, you start chilling out and play OpFor again anyway. Which is actually quite close to my personal airsoft journey.
Bang on for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to. Let's stay on why should I give it a go? Why should I give it a go a lot more? I put my personal perspective in. I don't actually play that much airsoft. I do a little bit of skirmishing, and then I tend to do very heavily themed games, and the games I tend to really enjoy actually. And we've touched, I think, Max Hunt and Gaz have touched on it in the comments already. Is that games with crew, and this is where it really, for me, really works, is when we're talking about games that they don't have two sides. You really have a player side, and you have a bunch of crew. And we've talked about it before with kind of a computer games analogy, where most airsoft games are PvP, and these kind of crude games are much more PvE, so much more like playing a single player computer game where the environment's out to get you, but the crew are the environment rather than the computer being the environment. And that's the stuff I really enjoy from a personal perspective, is really annoying people like Max and our mate Ben Manicum, because that's the way it goes. Have you guys played much of those style of games? I mean, it kind of sounds a bit like providing OpFor in the military, Sean. Have you done much of that, Gadge?
Yeah, a little bit. Mainly, again, working with Gunman Airsoft. I've been at games where, in fact, I've ran games for Gunman. I ran a post-apocalypse game where we told some of the guys who were the crew, to give the players a hard time, put shots their way. Don't make it easy for them, but you're not actively out there to knock them out of the game. You're there to make them hit the dirt. You're there to make them crawl. You're there to make them struggle a little bit, rather because they had, effectively the crew there had as much ammo as they wanted, whereas the player base had very limited ammo, like less than 50 to 100 rounds a player. So it was a case of make them feel like they're under threat without ruining their day. And I quite enjoy that. And again, even playing as a traditional non-crew, I remember games you've ran in the past at First and Only, Tom, where the Viet Cong forces, because there were less of you, would use things like human wave attacks. So you'd attack, you'd get shot out, you'd go out of sight and come back in again, which isn't the sort of thing you'd be able to get away with on a normal gaming day.
It was funny how people were very willing at First and Only Matlock to do that, and they were almost crewing to a large extent. It was really great community we had up there. Sean, I mean, obviously you've done some stuff outside of Airsoft on that vein. What's that kind of like? How does that work?
That's actually very, very similar to what you've just been saying. You're there because we were doing it as kind of CP work, helping a company train CP specialists in what to do from civilian life going up to CP work. So we were doing things like that where it's a scripted, right, guys, you're going to drive around in this car with a VP in the car, and they're going to see that as a HVT, and you are going to bump them and make their lives as miserable as possible. And you'll do that, and you'll set up anywhere around a designated route, and you'll just smash them and force them to then go into drills to fall back.
Okay.
And then you just basically follow them just to test their reactions more than anything else. And that was what we were doing quite a lot of. And that was always actually a really fun day. I used to love doing that stuff.
So I think one of the things we've talked about fun a lot. I think we've also talked about being if it's not so scripted and not a crew event, we've talked about being a bit more loose in terms of rules of engagement. So I know we've got quite a lot of newer players on. Shall we just have a brief chat about what that means? Because I'm not sure people will know what rules of engagement might necessarily mean. So Gadge or Sean, do you want to have a brief chat about what that means and how that might affect a game or something along those lines? If people haven't been to a big milsim or a big organised event before.
The military runs on a set of rules, the art of war type stuff, rules of engagement. And any engagement that you have has specific rules as to when you can and can't shoot. And it comes in tightening boundaries as well. So there's some areas, like you see it in the film Black Hawk Down, where he says, well, they're not shooting at us. You know when they're shooting at us and you can't engage. And then they start shooting at them. Now they're shooting engage. That's the type of thing. And with the milsim, they've taken that huge list of rules that the military has, shrunk it right down to make it easier to use. And they'll say, during, say, a morning session, your ROE is really tight. You're in this village for hearts and minds only. Do not engage unless engaged upon. And they will make it quite specific. And then later on, that will loosen off to if somebody's carrying a weapon, you can then start looking at engaging them or at least stopping them and treating them as a HVT, a high value target. And then later that will just completely disappear and it will become a free fire zone. And that's when it all kicks off. Yeah. That's pretty much as basic as they go with it. And it is actually quite fun to play around with it when you're OpFor.
Gadge, you got something to add?
Yeah. I think they translate very well to a lot of the games I've played. Not even the hardcore mil sims. I mean, a lot of the more film sims, battle sim type ones. We played one Soviet-Afghan war where we had to recce all the positions, and we didn't know if the guys in the packle hats and the big blankets were Mujahideen or if they were Afghan tribesmen. And because we're supposed to be there helping the Afghan locals, we couldn't just go around shooting people while we recce positions. So we'd spend, and it sounds boring to a lot of new players perhaps, but we spend 45 minutes in a ditch waiting for the three go-turds to stop faffing around having a cigarette at the ridge so we could crawl over it without being seen. Okay, it's not shooty airsoft, but it's tense as hell when it's like the sun's going down, it's 7:30 p.m. You've got like an hour of last light to sort of like, recce that position, and there's three guys, sort of having a big chin wag and really where you want to be. Again, Vietnam games, we played ones before where if people weren't carrying a rifle, they were just civilians in black pajamas. So me and my friend Evo spent a lot of time getting in the way of US Marine recce patrols and stuff. Equally, if they left their stuff lying around, we'd put their Bergen over a mine that had the thing pulled. So they go, I've forgotten my Bergen, pick it up, we could bang and kill three of them. It's that, but they couldn't do anything to us because we hadn't done anything overt, and we were out of the area by the time we'd done it. If they saw us setting a trap, we were a fair game.
Yeah.
But what you do get is sometimes though you get very bad players, and I've run a game where this happened unfortunately, where the rules of engagement are ignored and it just makes the whole thing fall to bits. Because they'll just go, oh, and that's Dave over there. I know Dave's come to this event as an NBA colonel or whatever. I'm just going to shoot him and get him out of the game to make it easier. And it, like Ben said in the comments, both sides have to go there wanting to have a good event, not wanting to necessarily just shoot people.
Yeah, Ben's comment, I think one of the fundamentals of a good game is having both sides invested into the idea of putting up a good fight. If that's not the case, then the game goes to bum. So I think there's a slight element of role play, and we'll go into that probably in a bit. But also people just need to... It's that film, it's that classic... We've talked about it before, actually. It's about having that film in your head or that scenario in your head and being in that moment. Okay, so let's talk about how do I go about playing. So if I want to play as OpFor, okay, so I don't want to be the standard multicam wearing task force, what sort of games should I look for and how do I get into it?
Well, I think the good thing for this, Tom, is that it's probably cheaper to get into mil sims and film sims as the OpFor, because quite often crew places, if they're not free, they're cheap, because you are expected to take on certain roles and not run around on your own agenda. And because you are providing a service as such, rather than being a main hero in the game, so to speak. And also, a lot of the really big organisers will provide the kit for you. They might say, look, this is what we want the civilian population who are also the rebels to wear, and give you a list. But if you haven't got it, they will be a crate full of chest rigs and 58 pattern webbing and sort of shamargs and old olive drab combat jackets or whatever they want you to wear will be there. So it's a very accessible way to do it. But I think last thing I'll say on this, and I'll just echo something Sean did a while back. If you're going with an OpFor loadout yourself, as long as you're not massively out of time zone or country region, you can be very creative. Like Sean did a post-apocalyptic survivor loadout once. It was like jeans and a greatcoat, and a scoped rifle and a big rucksack. And it was like, what would a guy who'd left the city to forage in the wilds be wearing? He'd wear something warm, something hard wearing, and a rifle he could shoot deer with at 800 meters.
Yeah. I think, Sean, what have you got? What would you consider the way in to an extent?
Oh, I'm going to kind of agree with Gadge a little bit. It's finding a game that takes your fancy, really, but not. I mean, a walk-on, you'd probably not really get that same experience. So you would have to start looking at maybe some of the big milsim events, and then just going into it with the right way of thinking, knowing that it's not going to be bang a high cap into a gun and just rattle off rounds into a bush. It's completely different. It's a completely different opposite flip side of the coin game. It's much more about thinking, and following the story and just playing it. It's theatrics.
Okay.
It's a lot more theatrics than a walk on.
So I'm going to add Ben's being super handy. Thanks, Ben, with the questions. So he asks, do you have to LARP to be OpFor?
I think we go back to the crew game versus the opposing force. So traditional opposing force, if it's a game where let's imagine it's modern NATO, US Marines or whatever, or SAS versus, I don't know, modern Russians, and it's two well-structured gaming sides, and you're just the opposing force for each other. No, you don't. You're just playing a game of Airsoft. As long as you follow the rules of engagement, as long as you follow the scenario, your mission briefs, which I guess is acting to a degree, no, you don't have to LARP. But if you're going to do a crude game where you're playing characters, where you've got to be the Saudi interpreter or whatever for the task force, then yeah, you do have to roleplay it to a degree. And I know LARP's a dirty word because we all like to think we're better than the people with rubber swords, but we're not.
I think also, even if there is LARP involved, you don't have to be doing LARP. There may well be a couple of guys doing some more interactions with the players. Your kind of your lead characters on your side, but most people can just quite happily be in the background being a gunman and not do any of that stuff and not have to worry about it. It's even in a heavily themed Sterling game, one of the Sterling theme games, or one of the gunman games, when there's a bit of LARPing or acting going on, you don't have to do that at all in the slightest. You can just be sitting around in the background having a good time, enjoying yourself. Right. Okay, so I think so what we've talked about is it's looking for that role, isn't it? It's looking for that game, looking for that, and you might just have to be bit more selective about which games you go to, and read the brief and read the information that the organisers are providing to see what's expected of you on that side or not on that side. It's not just, you can't just turn up and blaze away as Sean said. I think it's but it's one of those things. So I think you just need to be a bit more careful about what you're trying to do. Right.
I mean, actually, Tom, can I just add something?
Yeah, of course, mate.
So, again, and this is a good point. So, we both went to a really good game a while back where it was a modern task force versus a rebel militia group.
Okay, so talking about Pilgrim Bandits, yeah?
Yeah, and I would say that 90% of the players got the idea and turned up in an old Woodland shirt or an Adidas tracksuit top or chest rigs and carried AKs and generally looked like a ragtag militia. And a few of the guys just use it as an excuse to wear their favourite plate carrier and their favourite fast helmet, as long as it wasn't in the task force colours. Technically, it was the OpFor rules, but it didn't feel OpFor.
Yeah, because we're in Adidas tracksuits and Russian kit and all sorts of random stuff.
And I think if you're going to do it, you've got to make sure that there's abiding by the OpFor's rules that as they are written and the spirit of them. So again, we'll go back to a Sterling game ages ago. It was North Korea goes bang. It was South Koreans versus North Koreans.
I was just going to bring this up.
Yeah, everybody went there in kind of like generic camouflages, green or tan. Black was allowed for the North Korean force, and they meant like paramilitary police, I imagine. Some turned up as SO-19 firearms, and what the fuck they were doing in North Korea, I do not know.
With a white BMW with markings they'd slapped on as well.
Yeah.
So it was like... So, yeah, Lancer said, I'm beginning to think I should pay more attention in drama. Don't worry about it. for the vast majority of people, it really isn't an issue. I think it's one of those things where even in a really heavily themed game, as I said, if you want to get stuck in and you want a kind of a leading role, or Josh at Gunman decides that you need to have a leading role because you've turned up and he actually knows who you are. Thanks, Josh. You can do it, and if you don't, you can just have a good time and really not stress about it. Yeah. That's a good question, Ben. I'll get onto that in a minute. Okay. So what should I expect if I turn up to play a kind of more traditional OpFor role? What should I expect from the game organisers? And I know it varies, but let's just have a brief chat about that. Who wants to lead me off?
After you, Gaj.
Okay. So again, a more traditional OpFor role from the game. I think what they were looking for is something that doesn't confuse the other side. And as I mentioned before, so let's say it's going to be as basic as green versus tan. If red team are in green camo schemes, make it obvious you're in green camo schemes. They should give you a good brief about what's acceptable, what's not. But it's about buying into what the organiser's vision is, and it's up to them to make it clear as well.
I think that's an important
point. Quite often, people aren't great at conveying what they want. Like, I might have an idea. I've set my game in Moldova, and I know what I think the Moldovan rebels look like. But if I don't put up loads of pictures of maybe similar looking rebels from the Balkan Wars and what the modern Moldovan army look like and that sort of stuff, I'm hoping that the guy turning up to my game has got the same mental image of Moldovan militia rebel freedom fighter as I have. And he might be thinking Pakor hat and like Soviet plash in a chest rig,
Yep.
And it might not be what I'm thinking.
So okay, it's an interesting point about the organisers being quite clear about what's expected and providing information so that the players know what to turn up in, which is what we'll get into in a minute as well. What are we talking about? Get confused. I had too much beer. I think so. And this came up earlier, which is about, and I have been to some games where the OpFor have basically been considered cannon fodder for the task force or for the NATO side. Have either of you experienced games like that?
I've been quite lucky. I haven't really. I went to one very early Sterling game, and my interpretation there was that it was written around the very small 30-man NATO task force, and it did feel like they had a lot more to do than we did, and we were milling around. But that could have been because we weren't being proactive and making our own story up. Because you get out of Airsoft what you put in, and if you sit there waiting to be tasked constantly, then they can't be telling everybody what to do all the time. You've got to try and make your own adventure at the same time, as far as I'm concerned.
Sean, have you had any experiences of that kind of thing?
No, only sort of kind of on the professional level more than anything else, and then that's kind of a given. that's kind of what you're there for, is to be cannon fodder. But outside of that, gaming-wise, no, I've not actually suffered that myself. The only time I've suffered that really is big weekend event walk-on style games. One in particular I won't go too far into because it was a complete hive of shit villainy, but there we go. But that wasn't... it was in Bristol. It was an interesting one, that was.
Okay, so generally, I think something to expect is, from my perspective,
our hands were completely tied. Yeah, our hands were completely tied on it. So, but that wasn't a milsim or anything like that. Without really a specific OpFor setup.
Yeah, I think sometimes there can be. I think there can be a lot of some, and I'm not saying this is very universal. Sometimes some organisers place a lot of emphasis and a lot of command and control and a lot of taskings on the guys that have signed up to play NATO or Task Force or Blue 4 or whatever you want to call it. And I think Gadge has alluded to it. Sometimes the command and control for the OpFor isn't necessarily as precise or as complete or as detailed and technical. So you may well have to choose your own adventure. You may well have to make up your own stuff. Now, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you're very heavily controlled and very heavily scripted, or sometimes you just have. It's exactly the same. The Blue 4 and the Red 4 have the same level of command and the same level of structure as each other. So I think you just need to be quite careful about what you're reading from the organisers and what you're looking for?
I think, Tom, very quickly, Ben and Gaz bring something up that I can answer in the same bit, actually, about people turning up in the wrong kit, not being allowed to play, and also whether costume's important. So for me, it's that 10 foot away, 2 or 3 meters. If someone's playing NVA, I don't mind if it's old British Army surplus, green shirt and trousers and a chest rig, and they've scrimmed any AK. It could be an AK-74. I don't care. Right, as long as from a distance away they look like an NVA, and I can suspend my disbelief. The problem is, a lot of the time, these OpFor roles aren't as popular as the all singing, all dancing Blue Force team, and people want to be the heroes. So when I've gone to Vietnam games in the past, the average breakdown back in the day was about, for every 10 people you got wanting to be Navy SEALs or AirCab, you got 3 people who turn up in like black combats to be the Viet Cong. And the game organisers can't turn the guy away who turns up in DPM because they just can't afford to lose the OpFor.
Sean, have you got any experience of that kind of thing?
I've not seen anybody turned away. I've seen somebody have to turn their shirt inside out because it was obviously a different colour on the inside than it was on the outside. And luckily they were able to borrow a different sort of ammo carrying capability, i.e. they basically ended up using it all in a backpack, because they turned up with the full Rick-ass plate carrier and in tan and all of that stuff, which is completely against the description that was given. So it was kind of the players' fault for that, but they were accommodated wherever was possible. They just had to essentially adapt and overcome just to get out and do what they wanted to do. I think that's probably one of the only real occasions where I've seen it close to somebody being turned away.
I know for one, I've been to battle sims and they've said they've had uniform rules, and you turn up and then everyone gets taped. And that annoys the absolute shit out of me. It's like, really, people can just buy a fucking second shirt, right? Even if just have a DPM shirt and a MTP shirt, and really it's £5, right, from a surplus store, and then that's probably all. And for a battle sim, which is non-themed, not really even an OpFor, we're talking about a different thing, which is about themed games. Just for fuck's sake, just play the game, because as soon as you turn up at a mil sim or a battle sim and you're having to tape each other, that's just bollocks. But I think there's also an onus on. I know some organisers have, as you said, Gadge, have a big bag of kit.
Dress up box.
They have a big dress up box, and it can be, it's just a load of green shirts. Fine.
I've got a dress up box. It hasn't got combat gear in it.
Well, that's another live stream, which we'll do after dark, Gadge.
Yeah, that's the late show.
We're going to do at some point, actually. Do Airsoft after dark, and get into some stuff. So that really annoys me. It's like if you've advertised a battle sim and you've advertised uniform rules, stick to the uniform rules, or have kit you can throw at people or turn them away. It's quite simple, really. It's not too bad at all. I'm going to lose my. Glenn says hate tape even on a scum. I hate tape as well, to be honest. When we had First and Only Matlock, we didn't. This is like 15 years ago. We didn't have tape. We just divided everyone by what they were wearing. And
that's because our team was 40 of us, Tom, when we all turned up in Flex on.
Well, it's normally everyone versus the LFO and Flex on, but that was one of the things, wasn't it? And Max has pointed out Josh from Gunman's Dress Up Warehouse is utterly ridiculous and quite amazing. So if you look at the thumbnail from the show, other than my trousers and the AK I'm wearing, every single bit of that kit came from Josh's dress up box. So that was amazing. That was a crude role. So to a certain extent, that's expected at one of those events. But it's a crude role, and I was like the local area commander. So as we laughed about earlier, I turned up as a crew, quite happy to do whatever. And Josh, thank you, Josh, if you're watching, decided to make me in charge, which was brilliant. But he gave me a name, he gave me a role, he gave me a motivation, he gave me a script, he gave me things to do. So I was Captain Barca, who very sadly got captured by Delta Force and stuck in a container and then flown off to Guantanamo Bay, or shot in the head. I never quite established if he's still alive or not. But brilliant, isn't it? That was absolutely brilliant. But having those props, having that really stupid officer's hat was great.
Yeah. I think, Tom, there's another question there by Jack O'Neill, and I think the answer to that, Jack, is that
Where's that?
it's about how you could turn up to his OpFor with the wrong gear, because it would cost $50 to $80 to buy a full generic kit. And you're right, it would. But unfortunately, a lot of people, especially in the early big games, who go, I want to play a weekender. I don't actually give a shit about the story. I want to go as my SEAL Team 6 loadout, and I don't care if it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Cool. I think so. That's an interesting segue, actually. I'm going to switch the questions around a bit. So, what gear should I buy to play OpFor? So, let's talk about the basics. And I know, and there's been a lot of fights in the Middle East recently. So, let's talk about some, or even just in general, some really basic, simple kit that will serve you extremely well if you want to play OpFor.
Jeans and t-shirt.
Yeah.
And Primark.
I would say.
And a cheap chick on chest rig or something.
Okay, so Chicoms, okay? So we've talked about...
Chicom chest rig. I agree with jeans and t-shirt. Nearly universally, because all the Bluefor generally wear quite specific camouflage. Get something in neutral tones. Get yourself a plain green M65 field jacket or something like that.
Yeah.
They're like £5, in surplus shops and stuff like that, or a comparable one like that. A pair of plain green or tan trousers, just so you're not wearing camouflage when you do it. Chamois scarves are great. They're practical. They cover your lower face, so you don't, so you don't have to worry about getting your teeth shot out while still looking the part. Essentially, it'll depend on where your game's based, as we say. Lately, Adidas tracksuits have always become quite popular because that's gone on from the Balkans through to, the modern fighting in Russia. There's that whole Slavic tracksuit thing going on that, it's a good look, it's strong, it's clear that you're not a military operator and you're a rebel, you're an insurgent.
Sean, have you got anything? I mean, we'll dive into this a bit more, but have you got any kind of broad strokes? You talked about jeans and a t-shirt.
Like Gaj said, just try and sway away from your usual camouflage patterns, even if you mix camouflage as well. So like a DPM jacket and, I don't know, US tricolour trousers.
Yeah.
So it just looks thrown together. That's kind of almost the look that you trying to look at is the thrown together look. So you don't look like one of those, the guy wearing his multicam with his full fast helmet and full top end cry plate carrier and stuff like that. You're trying to look like somebody who doesn't have that.
A lot of it's about changing your overall colour and changing your silhouette. If you can do those two things, there's been stuff like, so even in some games where you do green versus tan, that can get quite confusing depending on what specific green camouflage you wear or what specific tan camouflage you wear. ATAX FG is a classic one. ATAX can look tan or it can look green depending on what colour the sky is that day. So things like that.
Templar's Ranger green is very pale for green as well. So that can get confusing, especially at a distance. You're 80 meters out and you're watching, and Templar mag pouch Ranger green basically on their plate carriers is disgustingly bad.
I think staying away from plate carriers is probably the number one easiest thing to do. So obviously don't wear multicam, right? Okay, simple. Probably not wear a plate carrier unless we're talking about rush. It depends on the OpFor, doesn't it? So if we're looking at a scenario that we were going to play Gadge, we met with Op White Bear. We were going to have modern Russians. So they would have been wearing plate carriers. They would have been wearing armor. They would have been wearing assault vests. But they would have been in very specific digiflora. So it's one of those. If you're portraying a very specific army, then that may well be a need to do that. But in general, I think staying away from your normal plate carrier. I mean, just wearing jeans and t-shirt and throwing your plate carrier on may not really be enough.
I also think, it's about, I said before, it's about buying into that story what the people got. So at White Bear, we were very clear about what you could wear and you couldn't wear. And we said, Russian, it's digiflora, UKSF, it's multicam. And what you don't want to have as an organizer is people going, oh, well, I've got this Russian tiger stripe that some unit wore. Can I wear that? No, because it's really clear what we expect from you. And airsofters will spend 80 fucking £1,000 on, I don't know, they'll spend £100 on a radio that they'll never use, but they won't spend £10 on a plain green pair of trousers.
Yeah.
It's crazy,
And it is. I mean, even swaying away from plate carriers as well, when you can go down your local army surplus and buy one of the old PLCE 90 sort of chest rigs that they used to do. For a tenner, and then you just paint it. You paint it with cream emulsion or something, and it just made it look totally different. I've got plenty of painted rigs in the shed from doing that sort of stuff.
My first set of webbing actually was painted with sandhouse paint. I got it out of stores, and my regiment had used it in the Gulf. And I actually wanted a DPM set. I didn't want OD PLC with cream house paint over it, but I wish I kept it now. It's worth a fortune.
Well, they just smashed it with Magnolia, didn't they, or something before they went out? So I think. I mean, the obvious, and we all touched on it. The obvious example is buy a Chicom. Right, it's just the most universally useful bit of airsoft kit I've ever known. Anyway, just the very standard Chicom chest rig. You can get them on eBay for a tenner, Amazon, all over the place, and they've been used by everybody for the last 50, 60 years now, and we're including Blue Force Special Forces when they're trying to embed or stay reasonably kind of discreet. So that's just the most, it's an incredibly useful bit of kit. But straight away, if you're playing an OpFor game, that marks you as the opposing force anyway.
And your gun, Tom, your gun.
Okay, so we talked about that, Gadge. I asked you to dig something out of your attic. So do you want to? So if you were to buy one gun to play OpFor with, this is the one we'd recommend, Gadge.
I would say if you get an AKMS. Loads of different makes at different price points. Try to get that so we can see it. There you go. Folding stock. This will do you from anything from like Vietnam War up to modern Russian sort of interior forces. Afghanistan.
They're still being used in Syria.
Yeah.
With different handguards right now. So that gun will do you for 60, 70 years worth of scenarios. So if you're going to invest in and silhouette's really important. So you can be OpFor, and a lot of people don't want to buy a new gun. I understand that because it's quite expensive. So they'll be running around in a dish dash and a Chicom with some high-speed 416, which is a bit odd. But if you're going to invest in anything, I think that's an AKMS is from one of the more reputable manufacturers is the way to go.
It's the classic bad guy silhouette, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's part of it.
Even the SEMA AK.
The SEMA 70 series are absolutely fine.
Yeah, lovely guns.
They're absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with them at all. We've got LCTs, but again, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's just a very, and as Gadge talks about, it's an instantly recognisable silhouette. So for the guys looking at you, you've got an AK, or you've got something which isn't a high-speed AR build of some sort. It just makes life a lot easier for everyone, and it's part of that. Plus, it's just so useful as an item in your airsoft guns. It's just incredibly variable.
It doesn't just have to be an AK either. There are other guns available, or the GNUs that are available. VZ58.
Yeah, fouls.
It may not be strictly, but it's got a different profile. Fouls
G3s, which is you can have great fun with it. It's an opportunity to use something you might not be able to use if you run multi-glam the whole time.
If you want to be a sniper, there's a good old SVD.
Yeah, or even go older than that, get a bolt action. Like someone mentioned they got a K98. That'd be great. I mean, if you're playing a sort of militia guy, that could be something left over from World War II that's been storage for years.
Well, there's been SUG-44s seen in Syria.
There's Lee Enfield 303s as well.
So you can pretty much run. It's a great example. If you've watched a film or you've been inspired by any form of media over the many years, and you really like that style of weapon, what a great opportunity to have fun with it and use it. As Gaz says, G3 for the win. There's G3s all over the place. There's fouls all over the place. Fouls all over the place. It's a really great opportunity to kind of flex your gun nerd in a game without any. I've had a lot of fun at gunman games with a £50 BAR 10 VSR clone because it doesn't really matter because I'm just pinging shots at people or trying to. Yeah. Ben's just said, binging up Josh's Bendy Springer VZ. Josh at Gunman bought a load of Bendy Springer VZ58s, right? And they are. So externally, they are just horrific. It's the worst. It's the worst airsoft Springer you've seen in your life. You have to rack it each time to fire it, right? So there's two things. It cuts down on the volume of fire that the kind of crew can use, which is quite good actually, because it gives the players more of a fight. But actually, they're really good. It's like as a Springer, they were fantastic. So you can use all these sort of completely random weapons and just really enjoy yourself without having to worry about, do I look right? In that perspective. So what about? So there's a couple of other classic things. There's shmugs, whatever you want to call them. Sean's got one around his neck at the moment. That's a really easy way of distinguishing yourself, and they're absolute peanuts and incredibly useful things. I've got one in my everyday, the bottom of my bag that I walk around with in case I need something to sling, tie, hold things down, mop my brow, shade me from the sun. Incredibly useful thing just to own anyway, and absolute peanuts.
Yeah, I mean you can get them off of Amazon Prime. It will turn up tomorrow if you order it now.
And again, it's that silhouette thing, isn't it? It's a very easily recognisable thing. Even if the OpFor rules was everybody has to have a black and white shemagh, you can do it for a $5, and it's obvious who the militia forces are.
Yeah.
You know, even in the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong used to tell different cadres and companies apart by the colours of their scarves. You know, it's a very cheap unifier.
Yeah.
People are kind of agreeing in the comments. Thanks, guys. What about kind of? I mean, I'm going to call it a dish dash. There's a million other names for it. I've got one that my partner made. I don't know if you guys have bought one or got one from anywhere, but you can get those things. So we're talking about the kind of the classic Middle Eastern male dress, effectively knee-length tunic or shirt. You can get them, again, you can get them for absolute buttons on Amazon or eBay, or even go to a local shop if you have them near you. Maybe want to be slightly discreet about why you want it, but there you go. But
I mean, even if you don't want to go to a local shop, it's not to the same standard as a genuine dish dash, but you can buy ones from fancy dress shops, the old comedy Arab costumes that they do in fancy dress shops. And you can buy them and they're horrid to wear, but they give you the look that they want. And that's all you're after, is just that look, just to break you away from the pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can wear any sort of lower garment you want. You just throw throw that very simple garment on and you're done. I've got one my partner made me out of some linen. That's fantastic. Actually, I've been wearing it while it's been hot because, funnily enough, it's a really good garment to wear when it's hot. You know, who'd have thought
I've got some Vietnam-made, sort of modern-made, but in the same style, Vietnamese black pajamas that I wear when it's really hot because they're obviously designed for wearing in like really humid jungles and stuff. And again, I think they were £15 posted from Vietnam a few years back.
Wow. Okay.
And because they're dirt cheap. And again, it's a baggy black shirt and trousers that you can wear for any kind of. You could get away with it in an Afghan kind of scenario. It wouldn't look quite right, but it's fine for Vietnam. It's fine for loads of different things.
Yeah, we're going to make some. If you remember the old AATV tablecloth we used to use week in week out, we're going to make me a Vietnam shirt from the old from that old tablecloth, so it carries on going. Joe, my partner Joe is a fantastic kind of seamstress textile artist, so that'd be really cool. But you can get and it completely changes your silhouette, and so you can, even if we're talking about the classic Middle Eastern look, if you go with a dish dash from somewhere, a chicom and a shemagh, you've probably spent less than 40 quid. Amazing. And that's, I've got pouches on my rig just over there that are way more than 40 quid. It's just like absolutely fantastic.
But one thing, I don't know if we touched upon it yet, if you're going to mention it later, Tom, you've also got to be careful how you do these things, I think, as well. You've got to be quite culturally sensitive.
Yeah, so that's probably my next question, actually. So let's roll into that now, which is what should and what shouldn't I do when playing? So, Gadge, you want to lead off?
Yeah, so, I mean, again, I'm going to keep referring back to this Vietnam game, but they were so strong and such good games. You've got to, again, look at Airsoft as playing Army in the Woods, and it's not a political discourse. It's not like recreating living history. I'm 6'2" with fair hair. I am the worst Viet Cong ever.
I have been the world's biggest NVA colonel in the past.
And you have to suspend disbelief, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go and get some yellow Suzu face paint and daub myself up and tape my eyes up in a really horribly racist way, because it's pushing it too far, And I'd be disappointed if anyone did come along to an event with face paint on, even if they were playing. I've been to events before where, and you've been there, Tom, as well. We were supposed to be playing African militia, but we were all obviously white guys in, sort of like plain colour fatigues. Because it's a whole world of offence you can cause if you push that boundary too far of what's a game and what's getting a bit offensive.
Yeah. So, I mean, the gunman stuff, and Max is in the comments, and he very rightly said, it's perfectly simple, don't be a dick. Also, at Gunman Deltas, which is my favourite game of all time, there's no religion. There's no suicide bombers. We just don't do that because it's just, there's reason, it's just not culturally sensitive. I think 10, 15 years ago, when Airsoft was less mainstream and there was also less cameras around and there was less, not everyone had a GoPro, not everyone had a phone that can record in 4K, and also it was a less politically sensitive time. There was a bit more of taking the piss, and I think there's a degree, and I think you can take comedy so far and you can take comedy too far. It's a bit before it turns into Team America World Police. So I think we need to be a bit sensitive about it.
Even with World War II, Tom, when I used to run World War II events, I used to ask the German guys not to put a low accents on, because it's funny, right, if you grew up with watching a low, but it just becomes farcical after a point. It just gets ludicrous that everyone's putting these outrageous accents on, and it doesn't.
That's when it starts breaking that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's when it starts breaking that.
Exactly that.
If you turn up to, I don't know, say a Tora gang. Tora is quite a big one. That there's been a lot of simulations of the Tora period. You've just got to take into account your audience that's there. You may actually genuinely have somebody who is a Muslim on the other team, or even in your team. I have seen that before, a Muslim playing a Taliban, which was absolutely hilarious. And he was the worst for it. But we knew our audience was good for that slight take. But at the same time, you don't want to be pretending that you're praying at whatever time. You've just got to be cautious with how you conduct yourself, and never forget either that some of these people that you're pretending to be, some of them are real hardcore mofos, and they have spent years of their life fighting. Never forget that. And you've got to treat it with respect no matter what you do. You can have a bit of fun with it, but you've got to keep that tongue firmly in your cheek at the same time and not overstep a mark.
Yeah, I think the overstepping the mark's the key, isn't it? Like, because people have said it's not being a dick about things. But I remember an absolute outrage ages ago when at some sort of battle sim type event, a lot of pictures went out into the press of a mock execution of a guy wearing a shamag as a headdress. And rightly so, everyone was up in arms with that because it looked bad for Airsoft at the end of the day. It looked like it was some paramilitary training thing going on. It wasn't a simulation of armed combat. It was a political statement, But it looked like that anyway.
Yeah,
I think you've got to be so careful.
It'd be. I think, and Gadge will know all about this. There was a BBC documentary done on reenactors.
Oh yeah, all my mates are Nazis,
Yeah.
This one where they covered some of the War and Peace show as well.
Yeah, they showed the wedding and only showed the German side of the wedding, because at the wedding there was Allied reenactors on one side, German reenactors on the other, because the bride and groom knew everybody. They only filmed the German reenactors, so it looked like an entire wedding full of people in Nazi uniform.
Yeah, good old BBC for you.
So it was. I think it'd be very easy. I think we need to be careful because it'd be very easy for someone with an agenda to ruin what we're trying to do, which is basically trying to have a good time and trying to enjoy spending time outside and playing games and creating a film in our heads. This is always we're back.
No, we're there. We're still there.
Minor panic on my point there. Oh my God. Oh. But I think we need to be slightly sensitive. I think there's, so it can be quite funny to use some Arabic words, but I think we just need to be a bit sensitive and just make sure that what we're doing is we're treating other people with respect and
Well,
treating
my argument with the German one, when I spoke to the German team at the event, I said, look, you've got to bear in mind that if you're both Germans, you're going to have the equivalent of a Leeds accent or a London accent anyway, right? Germans don't have German accents to Germans. I'm sure they don't. You know, it's like they just sound like normal people to each other. So just talk to each other like normal people.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm the world's worst actor. I'm not going to try and. I have put a terrible Arabic accent on, but which makes no sense. It makes much more sense to just talk in your normal voice. Josh at Gunman, so again Gunman, when we did the Sahud or the 1990s games, had a really nice point. And what they did, effectively, they nominated certain players on the Blue Four as translators, and effectively the only people that could talk to us were the people that knew Sahudi or knew that language, and that worked really well. So and that was a contract between the players and the crew, that the players would just, if you were talking to them in English and they weren't a translator, they would just ignore you. It was just like, I have no idea what this guy is saying to me, and that was really quite nice actually.
It's a good rule. They use the same rule at the Flying Lead Westerns.
Okay.
So yeah.
So they're not doing comedy Indian accents.
Yeah.
Or Native American.
Angry, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can talk gibberish.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing you can possibly do, is just talk absolute gibberish. But as long as you're not doing it in some bizarre Team America World Police Gurkha Durka Durka accent, it's probably absolutely fine, really. Okay. So, is there anything else you think you should probably do or not do when you're playing as OpFor? Is there a what do you reckon, guys?
Don't go to fucking McDonald's wearing all your kit.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that tends to go for most. I mean, I go for most Airsoft anyway. I think people that travel up and down the M1 in full combat gear is probably not the wisest thing to do in the first place anyway. Really, is it? But yeah, certainly.
One thing to do. Sorry, Tom.
No, go for it.
If there's a thin line, especially if you're going to go along that kind of like slightly playing a character thing, about how offensive you can be, because like your character as that militia guy might be telling the Soviet oppressors that he wants them to go home and like multiply with their mothers, but Dave Smith, who's playing on the other side, might not appreciate being that said to him. So you kind of, again, it's knowing your audience, like Sean said. It's knowing that, do you know what? I know that's Ben Webb over there. I can call him a cocksucker or something like that, and he'll love it. You know, sorry, Ben. But like, if it's somebody I don't know, I might have to be careful what I do. I think being antagonistic as OpFor is great, but don't be any more offensive than you would be in a normal Airsoft game.
Yeah, unless it's our mate Ben Manicum and it's me and Ben Webb shouting at him for 20 minutes continuously, which was probably my favourite bit of Airsoft I've ever done at a Deltas game. But we knew Ben, and we knew that bless him, he could take it. But yeah. So, yes, English crew, you probably shouldn't drive from London to Durham in full kit, no, mate.
I've heard your eyesight gets better when that happens.
They sell really good iPro in Durham.
I think there's a Specsavers outlet in Barnum Castle as well. Okay, so I think we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation about playing OpFor. I think so are there any questions or observations from the comments? I know it's going to take 20 seconds, 30 seconds to Yes, Max, it was the bless him. So I'll just talk about that for a minute, because this is quite a classic thing. So we're playing crew. We're playing a scenario at a gunman event called Deltas of Sahud, which is set in the early 1990s. So there's a retro kit thing there already. And we were going to Ashura. So we're going to a meeting between the British forces that were in the country doing what they were doing, and between the rebels. So myself, Ben Webb, and his partner Jody were kind of given the role of being the rebel leaders. Ben Webb and myself decided that in fact we weren't rebel leaders. We were in fact PMCs. So we were British. We called ourselves Grant and Phil. So we were like from Sheffield. We were like British XSF PMC contractors, and we were working for a company called Sandlion. All of this was made up in the space of about 30 seconds. So Sandlion being a piss take on Sandline, who were quite a serious very serious PMC company. So yeah, and as Ben says, we possibly retconned the entire game to our advantage. So we turned up and we decided we were PMCs. We were possibly employed by the British government. Shh, MI6. Shh, sorry, Max. And we were involved in kind of steering the direction of the country because we were helping out the rebel leader. So we arrived at Ashura, and our very good friend Ben Manicum, who was in charge of the British forces, was at this meeting between us. And Jody delivered some demands because they'd captured her supposed husband in a previous game. And then Ben and me, because we didn't get what we wanted, decided to shout at Ben for the next 20 minutes. It was beautiful, and I really can't repeat what we were saying to Ben at the time. But take that fucking nipple helmet off your head and sit down, you prick, was uttered by one of us. But we know Ben very well, so this is part of the point. Is you need to know your audience, you need to know who you're talking to, you need to know them well. You can't just shout at random people because they may well take offence. But it was a great moment, and I really enjoyed it. But it was very tense. It was a very intense engagement between effectively a bunch of friends. But even then, it was still very stressful, and it was awesome. But that was all about, to me, that was what playing OpFor is all about. It was great, and. As Max says, it was utterly diabolical. Yes, well, there you go. And then what was really funny is Ben was on the comms trying to talk to his HQ, which is effectively Josh. Josh was ignoring him because it was really funny. And then so Josh knew what was going on, so he kept denying our demands, and it's great. But it was fantastic. So yeah, unfortunately, me and Ben decided to retcon the entire game, but. It was great, and everyone had a really good time at the end of it. And then we had a barbecue and some beers, and everyone was happy.
There's a good question there from Neil, by the way, Tom.
Yeah.
Neil Webster's just commented.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, Neil.
What sites make good sites for OpFor games? I think it's entirely scenario subjective. So we played that Afghan war scenario I mentioned at the start of the live feed. That was at the UCAP sandpit because it just gives you really good Afghan hills sort of thing. The lake's a bit weird, but
works really well for that.
Yeah, and then when Tom and I did the Pilgrim Bandits game, because that was set around an Omani firebase.
The Humber Airsoft, brilliant.
Yeah, so the Humber firebase was great to have a UN sort of peacekeeping sort of force sort of thing, beset by insurgents, because it was a firebase on top of a hill. It was perfect. So I think essentially it's just about knowing what story you want to tell, and then choosing the right site for it. Trying to do a Vietnam game on a desert site is a recipe for disaster. It doesn't matter how good your Viet Cong are; it's not going to work.
Okay, but let's do some shout outs to people. So Sterling's themed games, Sterling do a variety of different games. They do combat missions, they do theme games, they do role play games, so Sterling's role play games, perfect. OpFor.
Yeah, very good.
A lot of the gunman games, they're always crying out for the people that aren't Western. So whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Russians, whether it's the crew, their crewed games, absolutely, that's where to go. Have you guys got any more kind of specific recommendations?
I'd just echo that really, Tom, in that if you go out to a Vietnam game with an MVA loadout or a modern Afghan game as a tribesman or whatever, you're never going to find there isn't a place for you. There's always going to be a shortage of OpFor.
That was the beer fairy just turned up. I'm going to have this new one I've never heard of before by Salt ICAT IPA. I really should do a beer channel to be quite honest. Yeah. Where were we before I got very distracted by beer? So yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think just be very selective about the scenario and read it very carefully, and just choose one where you feel like you'll be valued as a player. I think it's if you really want to be a proper OpFor, there may there may well be a little bit of role play, but you don't have to do it. But it tends to be just quite heavily themed. I think quite heavily themed game is quite important. And that will come out, and you'll see that in the mission brief, and the way they write the scenario, and the way they want players to behave, and it'd be quite apparent. Any other questions, guys, before we sign off for the day? So, Gadge, have you got any stories from OpFor while we're kind of waiting for the guys?
Well, too many. I think going back to that translator thing, I remember once a Wild West Airsoft game, and they do happen. We were playing the Native American tribe, and obviously I was the chief of the tribe, but no one spoke Apache or Blackfoot as we were, other than our friend Mark, who, because he's got a big red beard and big red hair, he was a captured US cavalry officer, like in a man called Horse kind of guy, been absorbed into the tribe. And he was the only guy who could speak English. And we had an hilarious time where I was making outrageous demands to the Western sort of town mayor, while Mark was translating it. And I was being really offensive, and he was having to act like he didn't understand what I was saying. And Mark was making it very polite what I was saying and taking all the swear words out. Well, at the same time, Evo and Simon were raiding the store and throwing bags of coffee and sugar and all sorts of stuff. We pretty much stole most of the general store's contents while I was giving a blue tirade at the mayor of the town. And it was just fun to do. I mean, again, it was at an airsoft event. There was a danger of getting shot. We all had iPro on. People were shooting BBs at each other. But there were those downtime bits where you did antagonize each other and get to know each other's characters or the background. And there was a posse to sort out the Indians. It's like not Indians, Native Americans. It's really hard to get rid of those tropes you grow up with.
It is, yeah, it's difficult.
So that was a classic one for me.
There's some very interesting photos of you and chaps.
Yeah,
I need to wipe from my brain. Sean, have you got any stories of OpFor shenanigans?
Yeah, trying to sell the other team's gear back to them after we'd managed to lift it from their fob. Lifted all their Bergens from the fob when they went out on a patrol, and then we were trying to sell it back to them on the little market stall in the middle of Stanton for exceedingly high prices as well.
I remember, in fact, it might even be, I think Mr. Greenwood was once trying to sell hummus out of a small room at Anzio, and he kept getting people in to buy hummus off him, and then he knife killed them. So there was a whole stack of bodies in the back of this room. So these things, you can have great fun with this. You can have absolutely great fun.
What was Will selling at Gangster City, Tom? Will had his Russian gangster there.
Oh, God, it was amazing. Ben Webb asked, "Do OpFor ever cheat?" I don't know, Ben. What do you reckon?
Well, does anybody cheat in airsoft? Well, the answer is yes. But ultimately, it's you just got to try and reel in your own team and make sure that they're not going out of the spirit of the game or cheating.
I think there's a line in
basic.
I think you need to be. Sometimes you have a looser, as you talked about, you have a looser set of rules of engagement, and you have a looser set of what you can do. I think, and as other people have pointed out, it just comes down to don't be a dick, and don't take the piss. It's as simple as that. Which is what, to me, airsoft is all about anyway. It's just
it's staying within the spirit of that game,
and just make sure everyone.
For us, it was perfectly fine to take the Bergens out of the FOB because they left it completely unguarded, and that was fine. That was within the spirit of the game, and then trying to sell them their own kit back to them.
I think it's one of the, I agree. I think that's hilarious. I just think just don't be a dick. I think to a certain extent, sometimes as OpFor, you can have a slightly privileged position, and also you might actually know more about what's happening in the game than the players do, because you've been asked to do something. And if you're just out, I think certainly as OpFor, if you're just out to lay down some plastic BBs and just shoot people, it's probably not the role for you, because there's a little bit of and we talked about it an awful lot on this channel about social contract and just making sure that the people you're shooting at are having just as good a time as you are. And I think if you bear that in mind, I think you'll be absolutely fine.
I think also, Tom, it's worth noting that as OpFor, especially at some of the crude games, you might actually have something of a split personality, because 1 minute you might be playing, I don't know, the police chief of the local militia. The next minute you're playing an insurgent with a kit change on, and you've got to act like you don't know what the police chief knows.
Yep.
When
I was Captain Barso, I knew everything, and actually I knew we had some CIA spooks as workers in kind of in my, so I had a bunch of people, I had a bunch of workers, and I had a bunch of guards, and I was looking after them, and I knew that 2 or 3 of the players were working to gain intel, and I had to make sure that I gave them a good experience and they didn't get bumped, and that they weren't. Yeah, it's one of those things. I could easily go, oh, those guys are CIA spooks, put them in a prison, and that would have been rubbish for everyone, wouldn't it? It would have been absolutely shit. So I see Gadge is being asked about his beard.
Literally, I can grow a new beard back in about 2 months. It's really annoying. I have to shave it all the time. So most people trim their beard down. It gets annoying. I'm just like, clippers done.
I don't get it. I don't really get the. I know Sean's got quite a fine beard at the moment. I don't get any of the issues with beards.
It's like sleeping on a Brillo pad for me, mate. It's horrible.
The only issue I get is like around the moustache bit, absorbing coffee and beer and God knows what else.
That's really important. Having a beard probably helps for OpFor as well, doesn't it? But it can be, if you don't work from home like I do, it can be a bit difficult to suddenly start growing a really straggly beard for that game in 3 months' time. Okay, I'm going to wind it up now, but I'd like to say a massive thank you to Gadge and Sean for turning up and talking actually quite good information about OpFor and Airsoft. And again, massive thank you to all the comments and viewers. We've had loads of people on. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. So stay safe. Have a good time. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, ding that notification bell on YouTube, or follow me on Facebook. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.